So I'm going to say something that's probably going to sound a little bit unusual. And that thing I'm going to say is that if you're somebody who is an artist, but you're also a good business person, you have a good mind for business, then those two skills actually combine very well. And you might be well on your way to running a business that, compared to many other businesses, is relatively cheap to set up. Now, stop and think about this for a second. I know a lot of that sounded quite bizarre, but if you think about it, a lot of art that eventually makes money, like films and video games, even music or books, compared to a lot of other things, to make a very basic version of it does not actually cost all that much. Yes, you've got video games and films that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, but you also get some indie films that only cost relatively little in comparison, and same with indie games, and still somehow generate not just enough money to make to break even, but actually to turn a strong profit. And if we even consider like the rise of people being able to make careers on YouTube, or indie game developers on Steam, or even musicians who are able to make an entire career without a major label signing them on. Right now we're in a kind of interesting point in the world, or certainly technologically, kind of this wild west of creativity and technology coming together. I think the entry or the barriers for entering are a lot lower than they used to be. It's a lot easier to like create stuff, throw it out there in the world and having it stick. Now, the other problem is that because it's easier, that means there's a lot more competition than before. But if one is quite practical in their decisions, if you sort of manage to marry playing to the crowd with creating content that is good, there's definitely a career to be had. And if you compare it to a safer business, but that requires much more capital and expertise to set up, like let's say setting up a steel mill or a whiskey distillery, yes, if you create such things, chances are that you'll find more people or more clients for your products, because they're much more, how can I put it, they're much more basic needs. Well, whiskey, alcohol, I think one could argue is a basic need nowadays. But yeah, so if you think about it, if you're a keen business person and you have a certain artistic ability, you can really marry the two. And whilst insane profits aren't always to be found, you can make money. And even if your project doesn't necessarily mean a new career, a lot can be learned. I'll give an example, which is that when I first started out, I started on this website called Audio Jungle. And I got on quite early. I was quite lucky. So the barrier for entry wasn't very high. It just had to be well-produced music. So the music had to sound professionally made. But if you had good VSTs, so like digital instruments, and you had a certain level of musicality, and you knew how to mix your music well, you could enter, you could pass. Like it wasn't rocket science. I mean, the first few songs I put in, quite a few of them failed, but then once I learned how to mix them well, essentially I even used a lot of the presets in the software, like Logic and Reason and stuff like that. Getting my music in wasn't that hard, and then I started to make a decent amount of money from it. Not enough to replace the salary of a full-time job, but certainly supplementing it well enough that it eventually paid for holidays, whereas my full-time work was just, was paying my bills. So, it was definitely a plus. And to be able to make money from something you enjoy is a lot of fun. So what I recommend for someone who, let's say you just graduated university and you might be having a hard time getting a job, is that consider just making something, but then, either take a business course, or I do hope that if you are studying, you do take some business courses or you read some business books, because if you can combine that with your art, you'll find that in your first few years, at the very least, you could make a little bit of money with your art. And this is true for writers, for digital artists, for composers, producers, video game developers, videographers. There's a bit of money to be made here and there. And I'll leave you with something Picasso once said, which is that, and I am paraphrasing here, but he did once say that one should sell their art for cheap when they're starting because you're still very much learning it. So really, in many ways, others are paying for your education and you're enjoying making what you make. Later on, by all means, know your value and charge whatever is the right amount for your craft. But certainly at the beginning, get your art out there, you know, and see if people are willing to pay, and be smart about who you market to and who you create your art for. Because once you find a nice niche and you find the people who are willing to pay for your art, then honestly, it opens all sorts of very interesting possibilities. Okay, well, this one's a bit of a short one. I hope it's useful to you. Take care, guys.